We are going to interview Olbert Hiett Jr. for Olbert Hiett Sr.'s uh, service in Vietnam. This is part two of his Vietnam story and his experience uh, in fighting in Phan Rang January 25th and 26th. Um, and the first question was, where was your dad stationed on January 25th and 26th in 1969? And what were his two roles that he had there?
Well, in fact, he was in charge of the security police section and as well as the combat security police squadron. So Dad, because of his experience with all the weapons and stuff and training men, he was in charge of that at Phan Rang at that time.
Mhm. And his shift was at night, and he had two areas that he was responsible for to watch over. What were the responsibilities that he had during his watch at Phan Rang?
Well, as you noted here too, he was responsible for watching over the two aircraft uh, rearment areas that protected loaded combat-ready aircrafts on the flights, and he was also a duty officer that oversaw the combat security police squadron at Juliet sector, which patrolled the perimeter of the base. So, of course, they always had that going on during the day and the night, and he had the night shift.
Mm. Was that hard for him, do you think? Or he's probably used to night shift.
No, no, he was used to that, uh, to working all hours and things like that. Uh, as a matter of fact, just quick story, I forget where my dad was. When I was home on leave at one time, after being at Nam, I got a 30-day leave. I went home and Dad was in charge of security of a base back home. And I think it was in North Carolina. And as a stunt, if you will, to see if his men were really aware and awake and doing their jobs, he planted a toy gun on me and had me walk out on the tarmac of the base just to see what would happen, to see if they would, encounter me, search me and whatnot. And at the time I thought it was staying, but I thought, well, he knows what he's doing. So I did. I went out. I just walked out on the tarmac with a toy gun in there, and his men did encounter me and did search me and did find the toy gun. And he came up laughing and said that they'd done what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
But I remember him using me for that. So yeah, he was used to working at all hours. And I went to visit him, and it was late one night, and he had me do that.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know about how many soldiers were a part of the combat security team?
I would say it had to be, if you look at all of the number of things he was in charge, probably 25 to 30 men at least were on duty that night. Um, you had written down all the different sectors that he was in charge of. So it said, the Juliet sector, it had guard towers and 60 machine gun bunkers set up around the base. And I think it had several towers. It had 8 towers and 8 bunkers around the base.
Mm.
But he also had some manned teams on some Jeeps with some mounted M60 machine guns, some K9 guys that patrolled the area. So he was in charge of all that. So it had
Oh,
to probably
wow.
be 25 to 30 guys at least.
Wow. That's a good team though.
Yeah.
And that was a somewhat of a good size tower and fort. I guess that they referred to them as forts as well, right? Or the base itself.
It's a base. The Army refers to their centers as forts. And of course, Air Force is base, and Marines, it's camp, like Camp
Okay.
Lejeune, such and such, Tyndall Air Force Base, Fort Myers. So each branch of the Army or service calls their base, if you will, like Air Force Base, Army Fort, the Marines camp.
That's good to know. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that part to separate the different names that they give each post. And I guess really that helps to separate the different branches
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you're speaking about where they are.
If you're going to a camp, you're going to a Marine base. If you're going to a base, you're going to an Air Force. If you're going to a fort, you're going to an Army.
That's awesome. As you're saying this, I'm thinking of the different bases or forts or camps that I have heard of in the different branches and putting it together now. That's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's a little bit extra here.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Also patrolling the fence of the Juliet perimeter were canine sentry dog teams. How many dog teams did they have?
I think they had, I'm trying to look here. I think there were 3. They had 3 of them. So they had 3 canine groups patrolling different sections of the perimeter.
Yeah. And with the different parts of the stories that I read that did talk about the dogs were very active with coming alongside of them and working with them. They were an active part of the team.
Yeah, exactly. You know, as I mentioned to you, when we talked about the battle at Tonsanute back in, I believe that was 66, correct? Dad trained a lot of the canine men and their dogs because the dogs weren't used to them firing off the weapons and things like that. And he even modified the M16 for them so that the dog handler could carry his M16 in one hand and handle the dog with the other hand.
That is really cool. Even back then, that they had the dogs helping them. I love that. It seems like they had a good coverage surrounding the Air Force Base, but even with the security detail they were being attacked by mortar and rockets in early January. During this time, too, they discovered some of the NVA Sapers and gotten into the base near the Juliet Tower number 5. When they were spotted, they exited through the wired fence. After that, where did the security team see them show up again?
Well, they were at the fighter aircraft rearmaments. Sappers had gotten through and they saw them running across the tarmac. And I think that's when they had mentioned that they had seen them. I think there was a couple, and I do believe they killed them.
And when they were spotted, your dad was alerted to the location and he started to run. Where did they hide?
Well, they had in the backwaters near the runway. The sappers were in the water, and I think that's when Dad and them went after them.
Yeah, I imagine he heard the splash and was like, it was a giveaway.
Yeah.
And you said that they did catch him.
They weren't able to catch them at first. No, they did search the water. They went through it, and they did not. They didn't see them then or catch them.
And then your dad had written that even he waded through the water trying to find them but couldn't find them. Later on, they would capture one of the NVA Sapers that were there that night. What did the prisoners say to your dad about how close they were to finding them?
Well, that sapper said that they almost stepped on them. They were holding on to the grass below and breathing through reeds, and that they were so close to them that they almost stepped on them.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine a sapper being underwater, holding on to the reeds to make himself stay down and having a reed to breathe through. That's really tough. And
Yeah.
they came so close to them, they almost stepped on them.
Wow. Wow. And for him to admit that too, that's, I mean, it's amazing when we hear all of these stories and the encounters and how close some of them are, and then afterwards finding out, just even in the last story with your dad on his end, with how close the encounters were. It's amazing.
Well, it's like, yeah, it's almost like a movie, isn't it? It's very surreal. But these things actually happened, and this is what these sappers had to do to evade capture.
Yeah.
I mean, you do anything you can.
Right. You do
I
what you
can't
can.
imagine being underwater holding on to the grass and trying to breathe through a reed, but they were able to do that.
That's amazing. After that, your dad picked up Sergeant Bobby Day, who was his backup, and they met with the rest of the police squadron at the Juliet Tower, number 4. What were the names of some of the other officers who were fighting alongside your dad and Sergeant Day?
That name, Bobby Day, when I came back home, or Dad and I came back home, Bobby Day was still a really good friend of my dad's. And I think they saw each other from time to time, because I remember that name being talked so much by my dad. He spoke of him a lot. He had a lot of respect for Bobby Day. But some of the others in there was Staff Sergeant Kirk, Major Powell Jr., Lieutenant Colonel Wright, Sergeant Hatton, and Sergeant Logan, along with the help from the RVN, that's Republic Vietnam Regular Army, and the K-9 police.
They had a lot of people with a lot of different, I mean, the groups coming together, working together, all a part of the same team, you know.
Right.
I
Well, when
love that.
something like happens, everybody responds. I mean, that's what they're trained to do.
To just be there for one another. When they arrived at the scene where the fighting was happening, your dad noticed one of the canine handlers was wounded, and the medics were there helping him. What did your dad tell the other officers to do?
Well, he told him to get the wounded man behind the armored car and out of the line of fire, because they were kind of still in the open. So they had to find some sort of cover, and that was getting back behind the armored car and getting the wounded man back there as well.
Yeah, out of harm's way.
Right.
And then your dad ran to the passenger side of the armored car with his M16 rifle, and Sergeant Day was alongside of him. The grass in that area was tall, making it hard to see. What did your dad almost run over?
Well, he almost ran over an NVA sapper who was laying in the grass.
Oh, wow.
Well, he didn't when they're walking through that elephant grass. Like I say, it's very tall. It's up to your waist or a little higher. And as he was walking through there, he almost stepped on this sapper who's laying there with his AK-47.
Wow. Your dad could have gotten shot.
He could have. Maybe it was just the way the guy was laying. The way he was laying, he had his weapon away from Dad. And when he almost stepped on him or came up on him, and they had eye contact, he would have to have turned with his AK-47 to shoot Dad. But luckily, Dad had his M16 in one hand and I think his .38 revolver in the other, and he shot him first.
Wow. You were just saying that he shot him. But they made eye contact with one another. And that must have been a harrowing moment. Like, just.
It does. And, you know, you can either freeze or your training can kick in and you just automatically react.
Yeah, that's what you have to do.
That's what you're trained to do. I mean, some people may freeze, you know, not do anything, but he reacted according to his training and was able to, you know, save his own life.
That's awesome. Now, after that, your dad repositioned himself back alongside Sergeant Kirk. And then what happened next?
Well, they heard a loud explosion back on the Juliet Tower 5, I believe. Yeah.
And your dad then went to check on the other part of the security team while Sergeant Kirk did what? What did he do?
Well, Sergeant Kirk was using his minigun, his rifle, and his 26 hand grenades outside the perimeter of the fence to push back the enemy. So he was kind of like a little one-man army.
Yeah. I mean, in their own way, both of them were in the areas where they had to serve almost on point without backup. They almost were like their own one-man army.
Well, it's like Dad said, he was a one-man squad. And if you remember, back in '68, during that Tet Offensive attack, they only had the M16s. This time, look how they're armed. They have grenades, they have communication, they have a lot more firepower. So they were a lot more prepared. Dad learned a good lesson from that attack back in '66 on Tan Son Nhut. He said he would never be caught without communication about better firepower again. And this happened, and that's what happened.
And I remember that, and I remember how much he kept on him as I was putting this together, how much he had in his possession wherever it was that he traveled to.
Yeah, he was always prepared. He was always loaded down with weaponry.
Now, as your dad was running from the Juliet Tower 4 to the Juliet Tower 5, what did he see hanging on the wired fence?
He just said there were a bunch of dead NVA sappers were hanging there in the wire.
Wow. That must have been a sight to see.
Yeah, a
Mm.
lot of times what these sappers do is they will put explosive on themselves, and they will throw themselves onto the concertina wire to blow it up so that the other sappers can go through. They'll commit
Uh,
suicide. They will blow themselves up so that they can blow that wire up so that they can get through, unless you can kill them first. Now, it doesn't say that they had any explosive on them, but that's what happened a lot of times.
wow.
Vietnam in different places. You had sappers, and they spearheaded the attack. They would run into the wire, the concertina wire, which razor sharp wire, and blow it up, blow themselves up, and blow that wire up so that they could have a way to go through.
Oh, wow. Uh, for them to be, I don't know, the sappers to be willing to give in that way their own selves. I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I know. That's the way they were trained.
Wow. When your dad got to Juliet 5, what did they tell him transpired before he had gotten there?
Well, they told him that the enemy had broken into the fence and threw a grenade. Then one of the canines jumped up to knock it away from his handler and died protecting them.
Hmm.
And then the sappers fired an RPG rocket that hit one of the scout cars, wounded the driver, and knocking the staff sergeant gunner to the ground. No, those RPGs are like rockets that you hold on your shoulder. You've probably seen the Al Qaeda and them use those RPGs a lot.
Mhm.
And this rocket propelled grenades is what they are. That's what the RPGs, rocket propelled grenades. And they fire those, and they fired that at the scout car, and it hit the scout car. They pack a wallop, and it knocked the scout car over, probably wounded the driver and knocking him to the ground.
Oh, wow. Wow. They're powerful,
Yeah, the RPGs are very powerful.
and that's why they still use them today.
Yeah, rocket propelled grenades.
Mm. Wow. Now, what did they tell your dad happened to the staff sergeant after he arrived there?
Well, the staff sergeant, he got back up, and he got in the armored car and killed 3 NVA sappers that were firing at them.
Mm.
So he got back into the battle. He got back up and started fighting right away and killed 3 sappers.
Wow. That's amazing. After they had secured Juliet Tower 4, your dad went to check on Juliet Tower 3 and were able to defend Tower 3 from 3 sappers. What was the outcome of that?
Well, what Dad did is he counted 7 dead sappers inside the perimeter of the fence, and several dead sappers in the wire of the fence in the front of Juliet Tower. So this shows that you had a concerted effort by them to get into the perimeter so they could get to the planes.
Right.
And they were able to repel that by killing 7 of the dead sappers, and 7 of them, like I said, and several were dead sappers were in the wire. Now, those in the wire, to me, tell me that still don't know if they had any explosives on them, but if they were in the wire, they were there to blow it up.
Right. With the intent to blow it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, after that, they checked the perimeter outside the fence of Juliet Tower 4 and 5. What did they find there?
Well, they found a lot of body parts near the fence and numerous blood trails where they dragged off their dead and wounded. So they probably weren't able to get all of them, but they got as many as they could and retreated.
Yeah. And you said that they found the NVA soldier who was seriously wounded. Where did they find him and what condition was he in?
Well, they found him on the side of the drainage ditch, about 100 yards outside the perimeter of fence of Juliet 4. His right leg was almost shot off below the knee. So
Wow.
he probably lost a lot of blood, and he wasn't able to go anywhere.
Right. Now, when your father walked up to the wounded NVA, what did one of the soldiers ask your dad?
He wanted to know if they just want to let him die or give him first aid.
And your dad's response? How did he feel about that?
It made him angry. It made him very mad. And my dad ordered the medics to call for a helicopter immediately and to take him to the hospital.
Yeah. I think I would be mad too.
That's the way Dad thought.
Mhm.
I
Yes.
mean, you know, he's in battle, but I mean, they're also in battle, but the war, the battle was over for him. So no need to be cruel, but to render aid, and they could use him to get information.
Right. And I know that there are officers that think both ways, but I love hearing, like your father, officers that take that mindset. Because you're right, the battle was over for that person.
Yeah, Dad
And
said to treat him like a VIP.
that's awesome. What else did your dad tell them to do? Oh, well,
Well,
and you just said it.
yeah, he said the war. He said because the war was over for him because they needed him to get additional information.
Yeah. And what was that prisoner's name?
It was, I guess it's Neg Ng Van Thong, Thong, Nen Van Thong. He was a member of the H-13 Sapper Company, which is part of the NVA, North Vietnamese Army. So he was trained as a sapper.
Yes. Yes. Now, I was just thinking with these last 10 to 15 questions that we've had, where your dad was literally going constantly back and forth between the different towers. He was, and it's one thing to read it on paper, but it's another thing as you're listening to someone talk about it. That was a constant from Juliet Tower 4 to Juliet Tower 5 to Juliet Tower 3.
You know, he was always checking on his men. My dad, when I went to visit my dad, I could tell his men really respected him.
Mhm.
They knew he had their back. It's
Yeah.
like I said, when I was there, I went with him. He stayed on duty. He didn't stay off. He went around and checked on his men, and I drove with him as we drove around in that Jeep, checking on each and every one of his men in their towers to make sure they were okay and everything was all right. I mean,
That's
he
awesome.
constantly did that. He drove around to let his men know that he had their back.
That's awesome. I know he probably slept, but he was always on duty.
Yeah, yeah. And his men, I got that really, really admired and respected him because he had their back and because of his abilities. You know, he was a master of law weapons and all of his experiences that he had. So they really looked up to him a lot. And a lot were his friends. Like I said, I remember him mentioning some of their names. And when we came home, he visited, and a lot of them came to visit us.
I love it. That's awesome. Friends for a lifetime.
Yeah, comrades forever. That's the way it is in service. Brothers
That's awesome.
forever. Absolutely.
That's the way it should be, right?
Yes. That's what I
Now,
call my buddies. We call each other brother.
I love it. Now, during, and I'm going to try to pronounce his name, Ning Van Thang's interrogation, the prisoner's interrogation, what did he tell your dad?
Well, he told him that they'd infiltrated the Van Ring Air Base several times and gave details on how they planned their attack. And then when I read that, that's when I thought, well, gosh, I was there on December 25th and 6 days. So just 3 weeks prior to this attack. So they had been out there in the field while Dad and I were going around to check on his men, probably watching us, planning their attack. Because I'm sure they had to take several weeks before they did it.
Yeah.
And
And
that's what he said. They did several times to get details on how they would plan the attack. So they had done this a number of times.
and all that time, and again, your dad was not harmed or the officers with him as they're
No,
surveilling.
yeah, he said that when he thought about that, it said it made the hair stand back on his neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what did the prisoner say he underestimated about your dad and his fellow officers?
They underestimated the firepower that my dad and the air police had. Like I said, they had 25 to 30 men out there, and they were all heavily armed, and
Yeah.
canines as well. And you know, they had those Jeeps with the M60s mounted on them. They had probably airman in those towers probably had M16 rifles. They probably had grenades. They had a lot of other weaponry. I mean, some of them may have had M79 grenade launchers. So they were properly armed, heavily armed, and they underestimated that.
Wow, in a big way.
Right, because they had been out there, you know, and he was always checking on his men. And I do remember driving around with Dad when he was checking on his men. And I remember one time over the comm, a guy yelled, "There's a snake up here in the tower with me." And my dad yelled back on the comm, "Well, shoot him, you fool."
Take care of it.
Because those snakes could climb up there, you know, those there were tree snakes, and they could do that.
Do you think that happened often for them?
No, I'm sure. Well, when I was in Vietnam, we often had snakes coming into our barracks, and we even had a cobra. I think I mentioned that story, to come into we were watching a movie in our little shack that we made as a clubhouse. We had a cobra slither in there, and we all got up and got it out, and one of the sergeants took a 45 and shot it. But yeah, you had cobras and crates. The crate was known as a step and a half. That was like a coil snake, because the theory was if that snake bit you, you take a step and a half and you're dead.
Oh, I remember hearing about that one. What is the name of it again?
Snake. It's a crate.
The crates.
But we called it a step and a half.
Step
snake.
and a half.
They're like a coral snake, very deadly.
Wow. Now, your dad said that when he was driving, we were talking about this too, that he could feel the presence of them around. Also, when he was driving, he said that he carried with him in his Jeep. What was the weapons that he carried with him?
Well, he had, of course, his M16 rifle in his lap. He had probably 360 rounds of ammunition, he said, a revolver. He always had a 38 revolver on him, a 12-gauge shotgun with 9 hand grenades. And with a 12-gauge shotgun, he had buckshot. Also,
along with the weapons that he carried, what else did he make sure that he had with him?
A radio for communication, like we talked about that back in the Tan Son Nhut battle. They didn't have any communication, and he swore that would never happen again.
You know, we as people I've noticed throughout all the wars that is a part of the process of learning, and just what we teach our kids. You learn from your mistakes or situations that arise, because really it could be looked at as a mistake, but it was something that by learning and doing, you go through the process of knowing what you need to have for the next time.
Yeah, they did all the things right here in this battle. They had all the right communication, the right weapons, whereas they were severely lacking, and they were lucky in the Tan Son Nhut battle, because all they had were M16s. They were really lucky. They were outmanned and outgunned.
Yes.
And this one, not so.
I still, even from the time that I've interviewed you for your father with that last battle, it still resonates with me how much God was with them during that battle, and the ability that they had being outnumbered like that. It's just amazing, that story.
Yeah.
Now, the Tan Son Nhut attack was before the Phan Rang Air Base attack. And your dad, of course, as we've talked about, he's learned to have the overabundance of weapons. And I think even a part of that with the training for the people, I think that there was discussions for him with the officers before this attack happened, some of the things that they could do differently around the base, even.
Well, exactly. Like back in '66, when the attack on Tan Son Nhut, remember that they didn't have good communication. They weren't armed as well as they should be. The canines weren't trained the way they should be. And Dad helped change all of that. He made sure that his men here in Phan Rang were well armed, well trained. The canines were well armed, well trained. And all that played in the success that they had in this battle.
Yeah.
They were no match for the sappers in
No.
this battle. Now, the NVA back in the Tonsanute battle, they could have overwhelmed them, and they didn't.
Yeah.
They were just lucky. So he learned a lot of lessons and put to use that knowledge and that experience, as you were
Yes.
saying, that they had
Yes. It's
to
important.
defend Ring.
It's important to be able to put to use the knowledge that we gain. It's important to not just experience things in life, but to be able to take note and to be able to implement the new things, whether we're in battle or just in everyday life. That's a part of progress, and it's a part of growing as a person.
Right.
We are adults, but yet there's always growth for us to have.
Exactly.
Exactly. And your dad was one of those people that paid attention and did that.
He did. He paid attention. He learned from it. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, several of the officers from the 35th Security Police Squadron, along with your dad, were awarded medals for their service and valor from the attack on Phan Rang. What were some of the medals that they received?
Well, there was Silver Star, Bronze Star, and let me just look here and see what some of the other things they had there. I think there was the Vietnam Service Medal, I believe. Silver Star. Dad received the Bronze Star, and there, of course, there were a number of Purple Hearts.
Yeah.
And some other Air Force medals, I believe. Medal of Commendation, Air Force Medal of Commendation. And that's what I see here, Kathy. I think that's it.
Yeah. And as we mentioned in the other interview, one of your dad's officers requested that your dad get a different award. He got the Bronze Award, but what was the award that senior officer suggested your dad get?
The Silver Star. And even my dad was recommended for the Silver Star in the Tonsanute battle. And he was recommended for the Silver Star in this one, but he received Bronze Stars instead. But now I see here, yeah, there was the Air Force Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart for the medals that were awarded.
There was a lot of medals that were awarded
Yeah.
to the officers with this battle.
Yeah, my dad's he's received like 2 or 3 Bronze Stars. I have those downstairs. He's received the Air Force Commendation Medal. He did not, luckily, in both these battles, he didn't receive a scratch. But a number of his men got Purple Hearts because they were wounded. Dad did not receive a scratch in either battle. And he was in harm's way numerous times. To me, it was amazing that he didn't receive a scratch. And then in the Tonsanute battle, there were men killed all around him and on each side of him. And yet Dad didn't receive a scratch. And in this one as well, he almost stepped on that sapper, and he shot him before Dad was shot. So there are numerous times where he was right there in harm's way, but never received a scratch. To me, that's amazing.
To me, it's amazing too. I mean, yeah, with everything that we've learned about your dad and all these intricate little stories and pieces of his service, it is amazing that he didn't have one scrape on him. That's definitely God was looking over him as a leader to make sure
he was extremely lucky. He was.
Yes. Now, how many years was your dad in the military altogether?
Well, from 1944 to 1974, so that's 30 years. He was in the military.
Mm-hmm. And what was his rank when he retired?
He was a master sergeant or first sergeant in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm. And what was your dad's occupation after he retired from the military? What did he do next?
He became a federal marshal for 20 years, a U.S. Marshal. So he loved law enforcement. He really did. That was his true love.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, did he ever talk about his job with you and your siblings when you were younger?
He did, but Dad never really talked about these battles. And I guess because, as you know, and we have copies that they were confidential at the time.
Mhm.
So I think when things are like that are confidential for a time, there are a number of years, and you've talked with other service members who couldn't talk about it for 50 years or whatever, because it
Yes.
is confidential and secret. So you can't say anything about it. So Dad never really talked about that a lot, but when he was a federal marshal, yeah, we heard numerous stories
Mhm.
about his exploits as a federal marshal. He did a lot of things and was in a lot of activities as a federal marshal. He was on was called the SOG team for the federal marshals, uh, which is like oh, a special forces type group of that unit of the U.S. Marshals has a special forces type group. Well, that was SOG, and he was a member of that. He was the oldest one. He had to
Mhm.
jump out of an airplane
Oh,
to do
wow.
a part of that. And I do have a copy of his wings, his little parachute with wings on it, to where he
Mhm.
did that. And I have a picture of him jumping out of the plane.
Oh, nice. I'll go back and look through pictures to see if I have a picture of him doing that.
I don't know if I gave you one of those, but I do have that because that was his days as a federal marshal. And I have a big section of that with pictures and group things and uh, things that he was involved in, special cases and things like that. When the Cubans came over from Cuba, remember when they sent a bunch over here? He was involved in that,
Oh,
in
cool.
going through and vetting all those different people that came over from Cuba. He was part of that group that did that.
Wow. Wow.
And he was
There
part of a group where they had a huge roundup of some criminals, like several hundred. He was part of that, where they used a lot of ingenious ways to capture criminals. They say they'd won prizes and stuff and send a limo up to take them to some game, and it was them, and they'd arrest the guy right there. They just that all kind of thing. They put a smoke bomb under an individual's car outside, so you'd think it was smoking. He'd come running out to see what was going on. They'd arrest him. I mean, they did all kinds of things that were ingenious.
That's awesome. It sounds like they had fun too,
Yeah,
coming up with
they
some of these intricate little ways.
they did. I remember going to visit him a lot of times in Houston when he was federal marshal, and I went up to his office one day, and they brought a guy in chains, and the other federal marshals looked at him, and he had his hair cut, shaved, shut, where he used to have long hair, and they said, "Oh, Jimmy, gosh, how much did that haircut cost you?" He said, "Oh, about 10 years." They had cut off
Oh,
all his hair, but yeah, they had a great sense of humor.
that's fun. Oh, that's awesome. Your dad said that he would go to the range still when he was older. Just like I guess he's jumping out of
Yeah.
planes when he's older too. Did you ever go to the range with him?
Oh, numerous time. When I was a kid, just tons of time. He was always at the range, always practicing. Like I said, he was a master pistol shooter with 38, 45, 22, and he won. Well, I told you once before, we had like 7 huge boxes, tall boxes, full of trophies. And I still have downstairs boxes and boxes of medals that he's won on
Mm.
various matches. It's like 45, 38, 22. And I didn't show you before, but I found where I've got his cards where he's a master pistol shooter and this and that and all the things that he did. He was always doing that. He loved doing that.
Yeah. I guess you know what, you do it as long as you do, and in that circumstance where it's just more of like hobby, where it's recreation,
Well, it was
to
part
be
of
able
him.
to have
It was part of him to
yes.
always do that, to be shooting his weapons, always going to matches. He went to matches up until he passed away.
Wow.
He was always attending matches and things like that.
Wow. Now, when did your dad retire from being a federal marshal?
I don't have, that was 1990 something. I don't have the date down here. Darn it. Well, it
Mm,
was 20 years. That's a 74. I'd say 94,
mm,
95, 94. So 74, he retired from then became a federal marshal's 5. So probably not around 95,
yeah.
1995, around that. Because he
So,
had a big retirement party and I spoke at it. My sister spoke and he had a lot of his friends speak and a lot of his colleagues that spoke talked about Dad as a living Clint Eastwood. He said, this is the guy, the real guy, the living guy. This is the guy that when there's a real bad guy that no one wants to go after, Bert Hiett goes after him. We send Bert, he'll go get him.
He'll go get him.
Yeah, he'll go get him and bring him in, and he did.
That's awesome. What a legacy he had.
He
That
had a
that
great legacy at that.
30
Great.
years in the military, 20 years as a federal marshal, 50
Right.
years of service,
Yeah,
and continued to do things after he was retired.
yeah,
That's,
yeah, he did.
that's awesome.
It was a remarkable career, really was. He did a lot of things. I think somebody would say he cut a really hard path that anyone else could follow, that I think that very, very few people have done or are doing today. The things that he did back then, the 30 years of service that he did, you know, being in World War II and Korea, Vietnam, 20-year service as a federal marshal, and all the exploits and the things that he did when he was a federal marshal. I look back on it and I am quite surprised and amazed at all of it.
Yeah,
It's overwhelming. It's daunting, the things that he did, really.
amazing. And we need more people that are courageous. And like you said, that they don't get paralyzed in the situation, but they move forward. They don't freeze in fear, but move forward and do what it is. And I hope and pray for a country that we have that, again, to that level of people. I've got 2 people in my family that are in the police force, and they're courageous with what they need to do. They stand up and they move forward and do that and encourage the people around them to do the same, and
Yeah, you need hard people like that. I think if I ever wrote a book about my dad or said anything, I'd start it out by saying my dad was a hard hunter. And
mhm.
that signifies the type of person he was by being a hard hunter. To give you an example, when we went quail hunting, I always wore 2 or 3 pairs of pants, because when you walk around other hunters would walk around briars to hunt quail. We went into the briars to get them.
Ugh,
You walked into that briar patch to get them up. And we hunted from sunup to sundown, and we always got game. And he always respected that. When we came home, we cleaned it and we ate it.
right.
So we had great respect for the game, and anything we killed, we ate, and he hunted hard for it. If there was a big pine thicket, other people would walk around it. We went into it, and that's how he hunted. He was just, very hard charging and determined and serious about it. Like I said, when we went hunting, it was from sunup. We got out in the field, and usually the sun had not risen. It was still dark. And when we came home, we'd get to the car when it was dark.
Yeah. And
That's how high he was.
just listening to you say these things, I think all of that, even though you're talking about hunting and gaming, the words that you just spoke, respect, determination, um, courage, humanitarian, like
Yeah,
thinking of the other person, and just constantly taking notes and moving forward, all of those aspects, taking care of the surroundings around you and just being vigilant, and all of those things are what makes a great leader. Yeah.
yeah, he was a good one to his men for sure.
Yes. Now, after he retired, was he ever called back to help on a case?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe he was.
Mm. Um, when you're with your dad, the way he was as a true gentleman and the way that he treated everyone fairly, uh, do you think that that influenced those around him, his peers, in their service and with their careers? Do you think that that kind of parlayed into their lives as well?
I'm sure it did, Kathy. I mean, because, when you work for someone or work with someone like my dad worked with his men, and he mentioned their names a lot. And the testimony to that is a lot of them followed up with him,
Mm,
called, came by to see us and stuff like that. They had great respect and love for my dad.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that rubs off on you.
yeah,
And you had mentioned not following up on any cases or anything like that. he did one, and we'll talk about it, but there was a case in Alabama, a real gruesome murder called the Mars Hill murders, and my dad investigated that for 15 years. Even after he retired, he continued to investigate that. And that's another story that involved a lot of family members, and it was a very gruesome murder where four elderly people were murdered on in 1986 on New Year's Day, I believe.
Oh, wow.
One. But my dad investigated that for 15 years, up until his death.
Wow. Just an unsolved case.
Yes, but he pretty much, I think, had solved it. He just couldn't get it to court, not properly.
Okay. Oh, man.
And there were a lot of circumstances involved in that.
Yeah. Well, but he kept on going.
So to the end,
Yeah.
he was doing something. He was involved in law enforcement to the very end.
To the very end. Now, if your dad was alive today, what do you think he would say or feel about how the law enforcement is looked at right now?
I think he'd be disappointed. I mean, there's so many things in the news today about defund the police and the way the police are acting or reacting. Not everyone. For the most part, law enforcement is good and officers are good. I think what he would do is say that law enforcement needs to throw out the bad apples. They need to recognize that they're there rather than protect them and keep them on the force. They need to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And that law enforcement would be better off without them. I think that's what he would do.
I would agree that that's probably what he would do. He'd be a voice for that. Yeah. Now, what are some words of wisdom that your dad has shared with you that still sticks with you today?
Well, I remember when he took me, when I was going to join the Army, and he took me down to the bus station I was going to go to induction to get inducted into the Army. He told me to, one, never give up. Don't forget where I come from and my religion, and to treat people with respect. That was basically the three things: never give up, treat people with respect, and don't forget my religion, where I come from.
Yes. Good words of wisdom.
That was pretty legit, yeah.
If your dad was here today, what life advice do you think he would offer to viewers who are watching this interview?
What advice to give to viewers? Goodness, I guess he would say, kind of like saying to me, never give up. Always respect others, their property, and them, and treat them well and with respect. And don't forget who you are and where you come from.
Yes,
it's almost like you are what you do. You are a product of things that you do and say and how you treat people. That's who you are. I think it'd be simple as that.
I think it would be absolutely just like that. I think you spoke for your father in a good way just now.
Well, thank you, Kathy.
Is there anything about your dad's Vietnam service that I left out that you would like to add to this interview?
No, except that, I served for 26 months consecutively. Dad served for 3 years, but just like there a year and then home a year, there a year, home a year, and then there a year. So he had a great commitment to it. And I think he wanted to be where he was trained. He'd been doing it all his life. And I think he had a great respect and for an admiration for his men and in protecting them. So he felt it like a duty that he needed to be there. He needed to go.
Right.
So,
I don't think he would have been whole if he wasn't.
Dad he wasn't without his flaws. He was a hard man. But I think in this world today, we need people like that. We need people that can get the job done. And sometimes you just have to be a hard person to do that, to get it done. So, and he was, I guess a better line would be, he was a man for all seasons. He was the right person there, the right person to be there at the right time.
Yes, absolutely. No doubt. And Skip, thank you for allowing me to interview you for your dad's amazing story. and his valiant leadership in Vietnam and the service for our country, and then for what he did after his service. I thank you for allowing us to have this time to hear his story.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Thank you for doing this. This story would have never gotten out without you. People like you that want to preserve some of these stories of some of these remarkable people. And there are many stories out there of servicemen and the jobs that they have done, and that some can just now talk about it, and we need to know them. So thank you. A very, very valuable service.
Oh,
Very much
yes.
appreciated.
You're so welcome. I'm so honored to be able to do this for you, for your father, and for others. Just as you were saying, so many remarkable stories. And just like we just said, some of them are just now becoming declassified, just like your father's. And so that ability for families, whether it's the service people that are still alive or families like you that can talk about it now, whereas before, this timing it's the time to be able to capture their stories. So I'm honored to be able to be a part of that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kathy.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.